In the dimly lit corridors of Orion Station, where fear clung to the air like engine grease, a warrior whose name inspired nightmares found herself face to face with an unlikely figure, a weary hauler whose greatest concern was delivering a crate before his boss lost patience. What happened next would unravel secrets, spark an improbable alliance, and ignite a chain of events that neither could have anticipated. As the heavy doors of the space station's docking bay hissed open, a gust of pressurized air swept through the area. This air carried with it an intriguing blend of scents. Burnt plasma coils mingled with the aroma of overcooked protein rations, and underpinning it all was a sharp, metallic tang that hinted at something more ominous: fear. The moment she stepped onto the deck, the bustling port seemed to pause momentarily. Conversations faltered, footsteps slowed, and every pair of eyes flicked toward her before hastily darting away. She moved forward with deliberate steps, each one echoing against the steel-plated floor with a resonance that spoke volumes of her confidence, a confidence that paradoxically made those around her uneasy. Her pointed ears, a distinct feature marking her as different, twitched slightly as they caught snippets of whispered conversations. Tales of her exploits had clearly preceded her arrival. Stories painted her as a figure of dread, a warrior who had single-handedly dismantled entire battalions on distant planets. Yet, amidst these dramatic narratives, she couldn't help but suppress a sigh. The truth was far less sensational than the myths that surrounded her. Yes, she was a seasoned fighter who had seen battles across the galaxy, but the rumors about her drinking the blood of her enemies were, in her opinion, utterly preposterous, especially since her preference leaned more towards spiced nebula tea. The crowd parted instinctively, people stepping aside to avoid her gaze, their fear palpable, clinging to them like engine grease. Normally, she would have ignored this reaction, navigating through whatever port or battlefield she found herself in. Today, however, something felt different. Amidst the sea of faces, one individual stood out, not because he cowered in fear, but because he didn't move out of her way. This man, tall and lean with tousled brown hair and a jacket stained with what smelled suspiciously like disappointment rather than oil, simply looked at her. His expression was not one of terror but of sheer exhaustion. Adjusting a large, battered crate in his arms, he muttered audibly, "Oh fantastic, another galactic terror blocking my way. My day just keeps getting better." Her initial surprise wasn't due to his lack of fear, but the evident fatigue in his voice. She tilted her head slightly, examining him. He lacked the uniform of a soldier or the hardened stance of a bounty hunter. No weapons, no armor, just a hauler. Intriguing. Taking a slow step forward, she watched for any flicker of recognition in his eyes, expecting the usual onset of fear. But it never came. Instead, he groaned, shifting the weight of his burden. "Listen, lady," he began, his tone not unkind but definitely impatient, "I've had a long day and my arms are about 5 minutes away from falling off. So unless you plan on moving, I'm either going to drop this crate on your boots or on my own foot, and I gotta say, I don't love either option." For the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar: confusion. She narrowed her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. Everyone feared her, it was a fact of her existence. Her reputation had been forged through war and bloodshed, yet here stood a man seemingly unfazed by her presence. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" she queried, her voice low and steady, edged with the quiet authority of a life steeped in conflict. He blinked, as if only now fully registering whom he was addressing. After a brief assessment of her armor and stance, he shrugged nonchalantly. His response was unexpected, veering into realms of absurdity that somehow disarmed her legendary intimidation. And thus began an encounter unlike any other, setting the stage for an alliance that neither anticipated nor fully understood yet. In the crowded docking bay, the warrior's imposing figure cut through the chaos like a blade slicing through fog. Every movement she made was deliberate, calculated, exuding an aura of power that commanded attention and instilled fear. Her journey through the galaxy had been marked by countless battles, each leaving behind echoes of both triumph and tragedy. The weight of her past clung to her like a second skin, shaping her into the formidable force that now stood before the hauler. Yet, as she observed the man struggling with the cumbersome crate, there was an undeniable shift in her demeanor, a flicker of curiosity that softened the edges of her otherwise stoic expression. The hauler, oblivious to the legend standing mere feet away, juggled the unwieldy box with a mix of irritation and resignation. His attire, marked by stains and wear, spoke volumes of a life spent grappling with the mundane challenges of interstellar transport. Unlike the warrior, whose very presence demanded silence and deference, he seemed almost comically out of place in this high-stakes environment. His tousled hair and weary eyes told stories of sleepless nights and endless routes through the stars, navigating bureaucratic red tape and mechanical failures rather than combat zones. When their eyes finally met, the contrast between them could not have been starker. On one side stood a living embodiment of galactic warfare, her reputation preceding her like a storm cloud, dark and menacing. On the other, a man whose greatest adversaries were faulty cargo holds and mislabeled shipments, his battles fought not with weapons but with paperwork and patience. Despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, an unexpected connection began to form. The warrior's curiosity deepened as she noted his lack of fear. In a universe where her name alone could send shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls, this hauler's indifference was both baffling and intriguing. It was as if he inhabited a parallel world, one untouched by the shadows of war and the burdens of bloodshed. His pragmatic concerns about his crate and his day's work stood in stark opposition to her reality, where survival often depended on split-second decisions and the ability to end lives without hesitation. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a shared thread of resilience. Both had faced their own versions of adversity, though shaped by vastly different circumstances. The warrior's scars were visible, etched into her armor and reflected in her piercing gaze. The hauler's, however, were subtler, etched into his worn jacket and mirrored in the lines of fatigue around his eyes. In that fleeting moment of eye contact, a silent understanding passed between them. They were two sides of the same coin, each navigating their respective worlds with a determination born of necessity. And so, as the warrior took another step forward, her movement still imbued with the grace of a predator, the hauler adjusted his grip on the crate, muttering under his breath about stubborn obstacles and unfortunate timing. The tension between them was palpable, a charged energy that drew the attention of onlookers who had previously averted their eyes. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the warrior hesitated, her curiosity outweighing her instinct to dominate. And the hauler, unaware of the seismic shift occurring within her, simply sighed and shifted his weight, preparing for whatever absurdity fate might throw his way next. Their encounter was a collision of worlds, a meeting of opposites that defied logic yet sparked something unforeseen. As they stood there amidst the chaos of the docking bay, an unspoken acknowledgement hung in the air. Despite their differences, they were bound by a shared humanity, each carrying the weight of their experiences in ways that transcended the boundaries of their respective realities. The warrior's gaze lingered on the hauler, her mind racing with questions that defied her usual certainties. Why did this man, surrounded by whispers of her deadly reputation, remain so unperturbed? Her intrigue was not born of arrogance but of genuine curiosity, a rare sensation for someone accustomed to being feared. She crossed her arms, her stance firm yet contemplative, as she studied him further. The hauler, oblivious to her internal musings, continued to wrestle with the crate, his frustration evident in every strained grunt and muttered complaint. Finally, unable to contain her curiosity, she addressed him directly. Her voice, low and measured, carried a gravitas that made most beings tremble. "You know who I am," she stated, her tone laced with an unspoken challenge. The hauler paused, looking up at her with an expression that bordered on amusement. "Yeah, sure," he replied, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "You're the big, scary boogeyman everyone talks about. I get it. But right now, you're just another obstacle between me and getting this crate to its destination." His words struck a chord within her. Never had anyone dismissed her fearsome reputation with such casual indifference. She tilted her head slightly, considering his response. Most people would be running in the opposite direction, she observed, her voice tinged with both amusement and bewilderment. The hauler shrugged, adjusting his grip on the crate. Look, I've got problems enough without worrying about some legendary warrior ruining my day. Now, are you going to move, or do I need to find a way around you? This exchange revealed a facet of the hauler's character that intrigued her further. Beneath his gruff exterior lay a resilience and pragmatism that resonated with her own survival instincts. Here was a man who faced daily trials with a straightforward approach, devoid of the theatrics and posturing that often accompanied interactions in her world. His focus was singular: deliver the cargo, and nothing, not even the looming presence of a galactic terror, would deter him from his goal. As they stood there, locked in an impromptu standoff, a peculiar sense of camaraderie began to emerge. The warrior realized that the hauler's disregard for her reputation was not born of ignorance or foolishness but of a steadfast commitment to his responsibilities. In a universe where fear was often weaponized, his indifference was refreshing, even admirable. It was a reminder that courage could manifest in many forms, not just through acts of violence or displays of power. The hauler, sensing a shift in her demeanor, offered a wry smile. You know, if you're not planning to blast me into oblivion, maybe we can call a truce. I'll get my crate delivered, and you can go back to being terrifying somewhere else. His words, though light-hearted, carried an underlying respect that did not go unnoticed. She nodded slowly, stepping aside to allow him passage. Very well, she said, her voice softer now. But I will walk with you. The hauler arched an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her decision. Okay. Sure. No offense, but you do realize people are staring at us like we're part of some bizarre alien mating ritual, right? He gestured vaguely at the onlookers, some of whom appeared frozen in shock, others whispering furiously into their comm units. The warrior glanced at the crowd, her expression unreadable. That is not my problem, she replied coolly. The hauler sighed, shaking his head as he hoisted the crate once more. Fair enough, he conceded. But if I get kicked out of a bar later because of this, I'm blaming you. Despite the absurdity of the situation, a small smirk tugged at the corners of her mouth. There was something oddly comforting about his irreverent humor, a sharp contrast to the grim seriousness that typically defined her interactions. As they moved through the bustling port together, leaving behind a trail of bewildered onlookers, she found herself reflecting on the strange turn of events. Perhaps, she mused, there was more to this man than met the eye. And perhaps, just perhaps, this encounter might lead to something neither of them had anticipated, a partnership forged not through fear or obligation, but through mutual respect and shared humanity. As they navigated through the labyrinthine corridors of the spaceport, the hauler suddenly stopped in front of a small, neon-lit stand advertising synth meat that was only slightly toxic. His brow furrowed as he turned to the warrior beside him. Ever tried synth meat? He asked, a hint of mischief twinkling in his eyes. The warrior raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued by both the question and the hauler's sudden interest in gastronomy. No, she admitted, her voice steady and calm. Well, the hauler continued, pointing at the stand, there's a first time for everything. You strike me as someone who's faced worse odds than a questionable snack. His grin was infectious, and despite herself, the warrior felt a corner of her mouth lift in response. Besides, he added, nudging her gently, if you survive this, it'll just add to your already impressive list of terrifying attributes. The stand's owner, a four-armed Gorthan with pale blue skin and a face that looked like it had lost several bets with a plasma cutter, eyed them nervously as they approached. The warrior placed a single credit chip on the counter, her demeanor commanding attention. One synth meat skewer, she requested, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. The Gorthan nearly choked, his multiple hands trembling as he prepared the order with a speed that seemed to defy natural laws. Meanwhile, the hauler leaned casually against the stand, watching the scene unfold with obvious amusement. You know, he remarked, this might just be the most entertaining thing I've witnessed all week. People usually run when they see you coming, not pay for dubious food items. The warrior shot him a glance, her expression unreadable. Efficiency, she replied succinctly, her gaze returning to the Gorthan as he handed her the wrapped skewer with a shaky bow. With the precision of a tactician assessing a new enemy's battle strategy, the warrior inspected the synth meat. The hauler watched intently, his earlier jest forgotten in the wake of genuine fascination. Finally, she took a bite, the silence around them thickening as everyone waited for her reaction. She chewed slowly, her expression remaining neutral. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded once. "It is adequate," she declared, her voice betraying neither approval nor disdain. The hauler erupted into laughter, the sound rich and genuine. "Adequate? That's high praise coming from you," he exclaimed, slapping his knee. Around them, the crowd exhaled collectively, some visibly relieved that the butcher of Zos hadn't decided to level the establishment. The Gorthan, meanwhile, looked like he might faint from sheer relief. "You actually ate that," the hauler said, his voice a mixture of awe and horror as he stared at her. "Do you want to suffer later?" The warrior took another bite, her movements deliberate. "I have endured worse," she replied simply, her tone leaving no room for argument. The hauler shook his head, marveling at her resilience. "Lady, if you survive that, I'm adding stomach of steel to your list of terrifying attributes," he quipped, though there was a note of admiration in his voice. The warrior didn't respond, instead finishing her skewer with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. As they walked away from the stand, the hauler couldn't resist one final jab. "You know, if you ever decide to retire from being a galactic terror, you could probably make a killing as a food critic. Just saying." The warrior's lips twitched again, the closest thing to a smile he'd seen from her yet. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she found herself appreciating the absurdity of the moment, her companion's irreverent humor providing a much-needed respite from the gravity of her existence. The hauler's communicator buzzed insistently, breaking the congenial atmosphere that had settled between him and the warrior. With a resigned sigh, he juggled the crate to free a hand and tapped the side of his earpiece. "Carter," came a familiar, authoritative voice crackling over the line, "if you don't get that shipment to Dock C-17 in the next 5 minutes, I swear I will personally jettison you into the nearest sun." The hauler winced, recognizing the dangerously close-to-snapping tone of his boss, Captain Rello. "Hey, Cap, funny story," he began, but was quickly cut off. "No funny stories, no excuses, no distractions," Rello snapped, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Move your ass, Carter." The hauler ended the call with a groan, turning to the warrior beside him. "Well, terrifying space warrior lady, as much as I'm enjoying this delightful stroll, I've got to get this delivery in before my boss has an aneurysm." The warrior nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Then we should move faster," she suggested, her tone calm but resolute. The hauler agreed, but as they quickened their pace, something felt off. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and he noticed the warrior tense beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the street with heightened alertness. From the corner of his eye, he spotted them, a group of figures dressed in dark armor, lingering too casually at the entrance of an alley, their gazes fixed on them. "Bounty hunters," the hauler muttered under his breath, his earlier bravado evaporating. "I don't suppose these guys are old friends of yours?" The warrior's expression darkened, her stance shifting into one of readiness. The leader of the bounty hunters stepped forward, a humanoid with a scar across his cheek and a grin that immediately set the hauler on edge. Well, the man drawled, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "The galaxy's most wanted warrior, wandering around a space station like she doesn't have 100 contracts on her head. Bold move." The warrior remained silent, her gaze locking onto the bounty hunter with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his bravado. The man chuckled, attempting to mask his unease. "Tell you what," he said, his confidence wavering slightly. "You make this easy, and I won't have to blast half this street apart dragging you in." The hauler cleared his throat, his voice tinged with nervousness. Question. If half the street gets blasted, do I get hazard pay? The bounty hunter turned his glare to the hauler, who raised his hands defensively. Just a guy trying to make a delivery, he explained quickly. But I've got a vested interest in not getting shot today, so. He gestured vaguely at the warrior. Any chance you guys could schedule this attempted kidnapping for next Tuesday? I hear Tuesdays are great for bounty collections. One of the hunters looked genuinely confused for a moment, but the leader sneered. You've got guts, human. Too bad you're standing next to a dead woman. The warrior's lip curled slightly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You assume much. And then, in a blur of motion, she moved. Before the bounty hunters could react, she closed the distance between them, grabbing the leader by the wrist and twisting with brutal precision. A sickening crack echoed through the air as the man howled in pain, chaos erupting around them. The hauler barely had time to dodge as blaster fire zipped past his head. Oh, for crying out loud, he muttered, ducking behind the crate. Why does this always happen to me? Meanwhile, the warrior was already dismantling the attackers with terrifying efficiency. One was sent sprawling with a brutal kick, another crumpled after a well-placed elbow to the ribs. The hauler watched in stunned disbelief as one hunter tried to flee, only for the warrior to throw a knife with pinpoint accuracy. It embedded itself in the man's shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground like a malfunctioning drone. Silence fell over the street as the last of the bounty hunters collapsed. The hauler exhaled sharply, his voice laced with incredulity. Well, that happened. The warrior stepped over one of the groaning bodies, her expression unreadable. You should finish your delivery, she said simply, her tone brooking no argument. The hauler stared at her, then at the unconscious bounty hunters, and finally back at her. You know what? Yeah, let's do that. And with that, they walked away, leaving behind a crowd of bewildered onlookers who would be talking about the spectacle for weeks to come. The hauler, clutching his crate tightly, muttered under his breath, Max Carter, you officially have the worst luck in the galaxy. As the dust settled and the last echo of chaos faded, the hauler and the warrior exchanged a look that spoke volumes without uttering a word. The hauler's eyes were wide with disbelief, his mind racing to process the whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. So, he began, his voice trembling slightly, you weren't kidding when you said you've taken down entire battalions, huh? The warrior simply nodded, her expression unreadable, as if she were weighing the significance of the moment against the countless others she had experienced. The hauler, still gripping his crate tightly, took a deep breath, attempting to gather his thoughts. Look, I don't know what kind of cosmic lottery I lost to end up in this mess, but I think it's safe to say things just got a whole lot more complicated. The warrior's sharp gaze softened ever so slightly, acknowledging the understatement. You handled yourself well, she said, her voice low and steady, offering a rare compliment. The hauler managed a weak chuckle. Handled myself? Lady, I hid behind a crate and prayed to every deity I could think of. If that counts as handling myself, I might need to rethink my career choices. Despite the tension that lingered in the air, a flicker of amusement danced in the warrior's eyes. Fear is a survival instinct, she replied, her tone almost philosophical. It kept you alive today. The hauler shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, well, next time I'd prefer to survive without the added drama of bounty hunters trying to turn me into collateral damage. The warrior's expression grew contemplative as she scanned the street, her senses attuned to any lingering threats. They were syndicate mercenaries, she said after a moment, her voice carrying a weight that made the hauler's stomach twist. They've been tracking me for some time. The hauler froze, his grip on the crate tightening reflexively. Wait, syndicate? As in the galactic crime empire it makes headlines for wiping out entire colonies when someone crosses them? That syndicate? The warrior nodded, her silence confirming his worst fears. The hauler let out a low whistle, running a hand through his hair. Okay, so let me get this straight. Not only are we dodging bounty hunters, but now we've got the galaxy's most notorious crime syndicate gunning for us. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. His voice dripped with sarcasm, but beneath it lay a palpable undercurrent of anxiety. And here I thought my biggest worry today was whether my boss would dock my pay for being late. The warrior's gaze flicked to him, her expression softening fractionally. You have a choice, she said, her tone quieter now. You can leave. Walk away. This isn't your fight. The hauler blinked, taken aback by the offer. For a moment, he considered it, the weight of the crate in his arms suddenly feeling heavier than ever. But then he straightened, squaring his shoulders as a stubborn resolve took hold. Nah, he said, his voice firmer than he expected. You saved my hide back there, and as much as I hate to admit it, I kinda owe you one. Besides, he added with a wry grin, someone's gotta make sure you don't get yourself killed before we figure out how to deal with this mess. The warrior regarded him for a long moment, her piercing eyes searching his face as if trying to decipher the sincerity behind his words. Finally, she gave a slight nod, a gesture that conveyed both gratitude and acceptance. Then we move quickly, she said, her voice regaining its usual steely edge. The syndicate doesn't forgive easily, and they won't stop until they've achieved their objective. The hauler swallowed hard, the reality of their predicament sinking in. Right, he muttered. No pressure or anything. As they resumed their journey toward Dock C-17, the hauler couldn't shake the feeling that his life had irrevocably changed in the span of a few chaotic minutes. What had started as an ordinary delivery run had spiraled into something far beyond his wildest nightmares, or wildest dreams, depending on how he chose to look at it. Beside him, the warrior moved with the same deliberate confidence she had displayed earlier, her presence both a comfort and a constant reminder of the danger they now faced. So, the hauler ventured after a moment, his tone lighter in an attempt to dispel some of the tension, what exactly did you do to tick off the syndicate? Or is that a long story best saved for when we're not being hunted by half the galaxy? The warrior's lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile he'd seen from her yet. It's complicated, she replied, her voice laced with an uncharacteristic hesitation. The hauler chuckled, though it lacked its usual levity. Figures. Of course it is. Despite the uncertainty that loomed over them, the hauler found himself oddly reassured by the warrior's presence. There was a strength in her silence, a resilience in her every movement that inspired a kind of trust he hadn't known he was capable of extending to someone like her. And as they walked side by side, their footsteps echoing in sync against the steel-plated floor, he couldn't help but feel that, improbable as it seemed, they might just stand a chance against whatever the galaxy threw their way. As they neared Dock C-17, the towering silhouette of a security droid stationed at the entrance came into view. Its bulky frame, covered in dented plating and peeling paint, exuded an aura of bureaucratic monotony. The droid's eerie blue light flickered as it scanned them, its sensors analyzing every detail with mechanical precision. The hauler, ever the optimist, held up the crate with a hopeful grin. Delivery for Dock C-17, he announced, his tone overly cheerful. Don't suppose you feel like letting us through without the usual hassle? The droid responded with a droning beep, its synthetic voice devoid of emotion. Cargo inspection required. Stand by for scanning. The hauler groaned, rolling his eyes dramatically. Oh, come on. I've got 5 minutes before my boss throttles me, and you want to scan my crate? What do I look like, someone smuggling illegal goods? The droid beeped again, its monotone reply cutting through the hauler's protests. Statistics indicate that 42.7% of individuals attempting to bypass cargo scans use similar arguments. The hauler scowled, muttering under his breath. You suck. Beside him, the warrior stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. She fixed the droid with an expression of cool indifference, her sharp gaze piercing through its mechanical facade. Are we finished here? She asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone unaccustomed to waiting. The droid hesitated, its servo motors whirring almost imperceptibly, a sound that might have been mistaken for nervousness if machines were capable of such emotions. Processing, clearance granted. Please proceed. The hauler gawked as the droid stepped aside, granting them entry without further delay. Wait, what? That's it? That's all it took? He exclaimed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and admiration. The warrior didn't respond, already striding forward with the same efficiency that had become her hallmark. The hauler hurried after her, still shaking his head in amazement. I've wasted years arguing with station security, and you just stared at it and won. How does that even work? He glanced at her, half expecting an explanation, but she remained silent, her focus already shifting to the task ahead. As they entered Dock C-17, the Lucky Break, the hauler's ship, came into view. It was a freighter in the loosest definition of the word, its mismatched panels and dented hull a testament to what the hauler insisted were mild accidents rather than a series of terrible decisions. Standing at the base of the loading ramp, arms crossed, was Captain Rello. Her silver hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her sharp violet eyes locked onto the hauler with the intensity of a plasma cutter. "You're late," she said, her tone clipped and unyielding. The hauler grinned sheepishly, setting the crate down with a thunk. "Technically, I'm on time because I just got here, and therefore." Rello held up a finger, cutting him off before he could launch into one of his trademark excuses. "Before you say another word, why is she standing next to you like she's your new co-pilot?" The hauler opened his mouth, closed it, and then looked at the warrior, who remained completely unfazed. He stammered, clearly at a loss for words. Rello's expression remained flat, her patience wearing thin. "That's the best you've got?" The warrior stepped forward, her voice calm but authoritative. "I required an escort." Rello narrowed her eyes, glancing between the two of them. "Max is not an escort." The hauler raised a finger, eager to defend his role in the situation. "Okay, but to be fair, I did successfully escort her here, so technically." "Shut up, Max," Rello snapped, pinching the bridge of her nose in exasperation. "All right, you know what? I don't even want to know. If she's not here to kill us, that's good enough for me." The warrior nodded once, her expression unreadable. "I am not," she confirmed, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Fascinating," Rello said dryly, turning back to the hauler. "Unload that crate, Carter. Now." The hauler gave a quick salute, scrambling to comply. "Yes, Captain." "Right away, Captain." "Totally on it, Captain." As he hauled the crate up the ramp, muttering under his breath about unfair workplace conditions, the warrior watched him go, her sharp gaze lingering thoughtfully. "He is unusual," she remarked, her voice low. Rello snorted, folding her arms across her chest. "That's one way to put it." She studied the warrior for a moment, her curiosity piqued. "So, what's your deal? Why are you walking around with a hauler like him?" The warrior considered the question, her expression contemplative. "I was curious," she finally replied, her tone measured. Rello arched a brow, skepticism written across her face. "Curious about Max?" The warrior nodded, her long ears twitching slightly. Rello chuckled, shaking her head. "Lady, you must have seen some weird things in your life, but if Max Carter is what makes you curious, you're in for one hell of a time." The warrior didn't disagree, her gaze following the hauler as he returned, wiping his hands on his jacket. "Okay, Captain," he announced, grinning broadly. "Cargo's unloaded, no bounty hunters have jumped me yet, and I haven't been shot at in the last 5 minutes. I'd say that's a solid win." Rello gave him a long look, her expression unreadable. "I can still shoot you myself." The hauler sighed, throwing up his hands in mock defeat. "Every time with this." As the warrior watched them banter, something about the Lucky Break and its ridiculous crew made her pause. "Maybe," Just maybe, she had found something worth staying for. Max Carter had officially decided that today was one of his top 5 worst days, and that was saying something considering he once had to explain to a customs officer why his cargo manifest said medical supplies when, in reality, he was transporting a highly illegal, highly explosive shipment of fireworks for a festival on Tarsus 9. For the record, it wasn't entirely his fault, mostly. But this was worse. Max had just watched the warrior take down a squad of bounty hunters like she was swatting away a mild inconvenience, and now they were casually walking toward Dock C-17 like nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just broken several arms and possibly a rib cage or two. To make matters worse, the people of Orion Station had perfected the fine art of minding their own business, which Max had to admit was a trait he usually appreciated. Right now, however, it was giving him a deep sense of existential dread because it meant that the galaxy's most dangerous warrior was now his problem. He shifted the weight of the crate in his arms and sighed. Just checking, you don't have, like, I don't know, a horde of bounty hunters secretly tracking your every move, do you? The warrior gave him a sidelong glance, her expression unreadable. If I did, would you still be walking beside me? Max considered this for a moment. Well, I'm already in too deep, so probably. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Max exhaled sharply, muttering under his breath, yeah, great. That's what I was afraid of. As they neared the docking bay, the heavy-set security droid stationed at the entrance scanned them with an eerie blue light. Its bulky frame was covered in dented plating, the paint peeling in places, and it had the general demeanor of a bureaucratic worker who had long ago lost any enthusiasm for its job. State your purpose, the droid droned, its voice monotone and devoid of personality. Max held up the crate. Delivery for Dock C-17. Don't suppose you feel like letting us through without the usual hassle. The droid beeped again, its sensors whirring as it processed his request. Cargo inspection required. Stand by for scanning. Max groaned, rolling his eyes dramatically. Oh, come on. I've got 5 minutes before my boss throttles me, and you want to scan my crate? What do I look like, someone smuggling illegal goods? The droid beeped again, its voice as flat as ever. Statistics indicate that 42.7% of individuals attempting to bypass cargo scans use similar arguments. Max scowled, muttering under his breath. You suck. Beside him, the warrior stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. She fixed the droid with an expression of cool indifference, her sharp gaze piercing through its mechanical facade. Are we finished here? She asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone unaccustomed to waiting. The droid hesitated, its servo motors whirring almost imperceptibly, a sound that might have been mistaken for nervousness if machines were capable of such emotions. Processing, clearance granted. Please proceed. Max gawked as the droid stepped aside, granting them entry without further delay. Wait, what? That's it? That's all it took, he exclaimed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and admiration. The warrior didn't respond, already striding forward with the same efficiency that had become her hallmark. Max hurried after her, still shaking his head in amazement. I've wasted years arguing with station security, and you just stared at it and won. How does that even work? He glanced at her, half expecting an explanation, but she remained silent, her focus already shifting to the task ahead. As they entered Dock C-17, the Lucky Break, the hauler's ship, came into view. It was a freighter in the loosest definition of the word, its mismatched panels and dented hull a testament to what Max insisted were mild accidents rather than a series of terrible decisions. Standing at the base of the loading ramp, arms crossed, was Captain Rello. Her silver hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her sharp violet eyes locked onto Max with the intensity of a plasma cutter. You're late, she said, her tone clipped and unyielding. Max grinned sheepishly, setting the crate down with a thunk. Technically, I'm on time because I just got here, and therefore. Rello held up a finger, cutting him off before he could launch into one of his trademark excuses. Before you say another word, why is she standing next to you like she's your new co-pilot? Max opened his mouth, closed it, and then looked at the warrior, who remained completely unfazed. He stammered, clearly at a loss for words. Rello's expression remained flat, her patience wearing thin. That's the best you've got? The warrior stepped forward, her voice calm but authoritative. I required an escort. Rello narrowed her eyes, glancing between the two of them. Max is not an escort. Max raised a finger, eager to defend his role in the situation. Okay, but to be fair, I did successfully escort her here, so technically. Shut up, Max, Rello snapped, pinching the bridge of her nose in exasperation. Alright, you know what? I don't even want to know. If she's not here to kill us, that's good enough for me. The warrior nodded once, her expression unreadable. I am not, she confirmed, her tone leaving no room for doubt. Fascinating, Rello said dryly, turning back to Max. Unload that crate, Carter. Now. Max gave a quick salute, scrambling to comply. Yes, Captain. Right away, Captain. Totally on it, Captain. As he hauled the crate up the ramp, muttering under his breath about unfair workplace conditions, the warrior watched him go, her sharp gaze lingering thoughtfully. He is unusual, she remarked, her voice low. Rello snorted, folding her arms across her chest. That's one way to put it. She studied the warrior for a moment, her curiosity piqued. So, what's your deal? Why are you walking?